Hello, listeners. This is What is Nerd Book Talk edition. Tonight, we got myself, Tyler Dietz, your host, and Nick Grant.
Hey.
So, we're talking Watchmen, chapters 9 through 12.
Oh, yeah.
Now, so Nick, you want to go ahead and let's do a summary and then talk about overall thoughts?
Yeah, let's do that, because obviously as we get to the conclusion of the whole thing. But yeah, so chapter 9 starts off with Dr. Manhattan and Laurie. They just teleported to Mars, and
right, because this is coming right off of chapter 8, where the last thing that happened was Dr. Manhattan shows up in Dan's house and tells Laurie, hey, we're about to go to Mars, and you're going to try to convince me to save the world.
Right, and it's right after they broke Rorschach out of prison, and then the cops are right at Dan's door, and so there's a lot of crazy stuff happening. So this is right after that. And so they teleport to Mars, and, you know, this was in my notes. One thing I think's interesting, for a comic or graphic novel, comic book, whatever you want to call it, that's pretty grim and dark, there's a lot of humor in it. Because, so, Dr. Manhattan, they get to Mars, he's talking to Laurie, and he sees she's suffocating, and he goes, oh, sorry, I forgot, you need oxygen to breathe. And then,
she's like pissed at him.
Yeah, she's mad, and she's like, what, I couldn't breathe. And she says, holy shit, I'm on Mars. like, I just thought it was really funny. Anyways, they're walking around his crystal palace on Mars, and Laurie basically says, I can't believe you built this, and she said she talks about how she's annoyed with John, that he really doesn't have any humanity and doesn't care what happens on Earth. And
yeah, because this chapter is based, like Dr. Manhattan said, it's basically just them debating whether or not humanity is worth saving.
Right, yeah. It's actually, this is probably one of my least favorite chapters, so I'll be kind of quick. But one of the quotes I really did like was Laurie's saying, why am I even here in the first place? You know how the conversation is going to go. We've had it. And he kind of explains that while they have, he still needs to go through the motions, basically. And he says, she says, I feel like a puppet. And he says, we're all puppets, Laurie. I'm just a puppet who can see the strings. And it really shows you that. I mean, I feel like that shows that he doesn't, we already knew he doesn't have any humanity, but just kind of how he thinks and how he sees life. Like, he's not a fool. He knows what's going on, but, you know, he knows he's still a part of the game, so to speak.
Well, and what I thought was interesting is because he tells Laurie, hey, in a few seconds you're going to tell me that you and Dan have been sleeping together.
Yeah.
And then whenever she tells him that, his feelings are hurt. So even though he knows the future, it doesn't hit him emotionally until it actually happens.
Right. So
which I think if you're going to create a character that knows everything, I think that's an interesting way to approach it, and that he logically knows what's going to happen, but he doesn't feel it until it actually happens.
Yeah, that's got to be a crazy way to live. Anyways, John asks her to share an early memory, and she talks about a time when she was about 5 years old, and she hears her parents arguing, and it becomes apparent that Laurie isn't her dad's or her mom's husband's daughter, that her dad's somebody else.
Basically, this chapter, her arc is that she realizes that the comedian is her father. Right.
Yeah, and she has another flashback where it talks about they're the crime busters, they meet up, and Laurie's mom was mad because the comedian was kind of flirting with Laurie, or just talking to her, really. It wasn't really flirting, but it's like,
But, well, whenever you read it, you think that he's hitting on her, but what the reader doesn't realize is that he is talking to her because she's his daughter.
Right.
And so it seems like so at first whenever you read it, you take Laurie's mom's side and, you know, hey, get your daughter away from this creep. But in actuality, you know, he's just trying to talk to his daughter. Which this is interesting because, so the Flash, whenever Laurie confronts the comedian at a party, she kind of yells at him and calls him a monster for raping his mom, and then he says, only once. You know,
right.
like by that he meant that they had a romantic relationship prior to that.
Right.
And it's like that's the only time that you see that his feelings are actually hurt by that.
Right, because he knows that Lori's his daughter. And so Lori still, I mean, she was drunk at the event, and then John basically says, well, rethink, now that you've thought about this, look at it a different light. And then she realizes that the comedian is her father, and basically John says, it's a miracle that you're here, because he basically just thinks that life is a miracle, because we all are miracles. I mean, when you really think about stuff, it's crazy that you think about the butterfly effect, how just little things that happened so long ago come up into play today. If somebody took anyways, I don't need to get all philosophical and all that, but
well, because this is what convinces Dr. Manhattan that the human race is worth saving, is because of the miracle of life.
Right, basically, and just he talks about how everything's a little miracle, and while Lori's sobbing, he says, "All right, we'll go back to Earth and protect it." And so that's pretty much chapter 9. It is interesting, but I felt like it was pretty long. And
what's significant though is that Dr. Manhattan has decided to save the human race.
Right.
After all, because again, there's the threat of nuclear war, and everyone's afraid that Russia and the U.S. are going to blow each other up. And so that brings us into chapter 10, which opens with a lot of nuclear war talk.
Oh yeah,
right?
It starts off. You got President Nixon. He's flying down to some bunker, and they're getting ready to basically keep him locked down, wait for the whole nuclear holocaust to happen. And then it cuts to Rorschach and Night Owl. They're hanging out underwater, waiting for the cops to kind of disperse, and then they go back at Rorschach's face and spare costume, and then it cuts. So it's basically their story and Adrian Veidt. And Adrian's back in Antarctica. He talks, and he's planning something. He's being kind of sketchy. He has his.
He's got like a big old cat.
Yeah, he's got a big like alien cat thing, and
he's watching like 30 television screens at once to get all this information. I guess this is how he collects information on how to run his company, is because he looks at television ads that are sexually suggestive. And to him, he's like, yeah, that is a sign that war is fixing to happen.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, because he connects it to like the baby boomers and how erotic undercurrents are connected to times of war, which is that's an interesting idea. I guess are Rorschach and Night Owl deciding to? I mean, what's their plan? What their
plan is? Night Owl says, "All right, Rorschach, I'm getting nowhere. You're obviously kind of doing your thing, so I'm not gonna let you take the lead on this." He's like, "What should we do? How should we get information?" And he goes, "You got to get to the streets." And so they go to bars and kind of sketchy places, and they start
torturing people.
Yeah, a little bit. And while they're at some bar, Night Owl, he talks to a knothead and finds out that Hollis Mason was murdered.
Oh yeah,
and so
and Night Owl loses his shit, like he's about to kill this guy.
Right, and then Rorschach I think comes in and says, "Hey man, take it easy." Mm-hmm. And he said, "I got the information." He says that there was a hit on Adrian. There was a third party, and it was somebody at Pyramid Industries paid for the hit, and so they realized, and then also they knew that Pyramid Industries was related to Adrian Veidt, and so they go to his office to kind of try to talk to Adrian and hopefully have him help them. And real quick, one note I thought was interesting. So the whole time too, you still have the Black Freighter comic stuff happening in between these main issues. And I don't know if you saw this, Dietz, but one of the frames, it shows the kid reading the comic, and on the back of it there's an ad for the the Veidt method, and it's like a workout program that Adrian Veidt did, and so it just shows another way that he sold out, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that did stand out whenever I was looking.
Yeah, I was like, what? I was like, that's crazy. Anyways, basically Night Owl and Rorschach go to Veidt's office. He's not there. they say, wait a minute, this isn't right. They look at his itinerary, Adrian's itinerary, and he's super busy, and they start connecting the dots. Night Owl hacks into Veet's computer and basically finds out that he's in Antarctica at his super secret retreat area.
Yeah, he's got a villain base.
Yeah.
You know, he's got a super villain base.
Right, and so they connect the dots and say, wait a minute, Adrian's behind all of it. And so in Rorschach, he's been writing his journal, doing everything, and then before they leave, they stop by the newspaper place, the New Frontiersman, and throws it in the delivery box. And so then they're headed off to Antarctica, and
also they had the flash with we mentioned this previously, and the comic hasn't really provided enough information for us to talk about it too much. But the island where all the artists are at, and it flashes to them, all these artists that are on this island. I guess now they're on a cruise ship that's leaving the island, and then the cruise ship blows up, killing all of them with it. So we get a sense that they've completed some kind of a assignment, some kind of a project, and they think that they're on their way home, and then the cruise ship gets destroyed.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't really tell us too much about what's happening here. But I guess the next part is whenever Dan and Rorschach are getting to Antarctica, right?
Right, yeah, and I mean, that's pretty much where this chapter ended, but one important thing to point out, so the next morning at the New Frontiersman, you have this boss editor and then this kind of overweight, kind of nerdy, geeky guy who's just there, like just some low-level employee who is kind of the whipping boy. Anyways, he says, hey, I found this journal, and he says, anything interesting? And the kid goes, no. He goes, I'll put it in the crank file, which is where the editors just put old stories and that they refer to if it's a slow news day. So Rorschach was hoping that his journal would be found and read. Well, it was found, but it's now at the bottom of this pile, and they're not even looking at it. So that's discouraging. Right. And that's basically where chapter 10 ends. And then basically all chapter 11 happens in Antarctica.
And now before we get into this one, so the name of this chapter, did you ever read the poem Ozymandias, like in high school or college?
No, I did not.
So yeah, there's this poem called Ozymandias I think it's by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And the name of this chapter, Look on My Works, Ye Mighty, that is a reference to the poem. And I remember the poem pretty well from college because basically the poem is just about this crumbled statue in the desert. And there's this plaque on the statue. And it's just it's like just part of the statue. Most of it's crumbled into dust. And it's just this plaque on the statue that's describing like, I am Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. That's what it says. And that's actually, okay, now it's Percy Shelley, okay. Because I'm looking at the last page of this chapter quotes that. And it's interesting to know that, to keep that in mind, because basically the poem is ironic, right? Because it's this grand statement about this statue. I guess this guy who was once emperor of this kingdom, and now there's like nothing left. Right. It's all been destroyed and stuff. And so that actually does kind of tie into this chapter a lot, about what the reason for Ozymandias' plan, right? But so anyways, the chapter picks up with Ozymandias / Adrian Veet in his villain lair, right? Yeah. And he's watching Rorschach and Dan approach his lair.
Yeah, but
right?
But where are they approaching on?
Oh, yeah, the speeder bikes.
No, they're Segway scooters. Is what it is. We got to get out. So like these little Segways, like on this ice, headed out to his base. It was the lamest.
And like Dan's like snow owl suit is like ridiculous looking.
Yeah, I mean it's the lamest thing I've ever seen. Well, maybe not the lamest, but it's up there. It's so. Mm-hmm. Anyways, so they finally get there, and then doesn't Veet? He says, hey. He talks to his associates. He says, hey, come with me, and he has his own little garden basically, in Antarctica, and he says, hey, drink with me. So he has his 3 associates, and he tells his
and they all die, right?
You're spoiling it, Dietz.
Go ahead.
But yeah, they die. He starts giving his own backstory because he's been in the story, but they haven't really gotten much into who he is. And so he talks about how his family was super rich, and he thought, he wanted to prove that anybody could be wealthy if they worked hard enough. They can accomplish anything if they work hard enough. So he talked about how he gave away all his money after his parents died, and he went to the Middle East. He was a huge fan of Alexander the Great, basically had a pilgrimage following where Alexander the Great traveled and everything, went to Africa, Asia, and after that he started adopting the name Ozymandias, the Greek name for Pharaoh Ramses II. And and so he tells this story and how that's kind of how he became who he was and realized that he wanted to fight crime and make a difference. And then that's when you see his dead associates that he poisoned. And so then he opens up the little tropical enclosure and all snow comes in and covers up the bodies. So Rorschach and Night Owl sneak in Ozymandias' villain prison, castle, whatever you call it, hangout. And they try to attack him. Doesn't go well. And Adrian, Ozymandias, basically mocks them. And he's like, you guys are terrible fighters. And then he talks about how he wanted to fight crime, but he knew that he couldn't stop all the evil in the world. And when he met up at the Crime Busters meeting that was a flop, he realized that the comedian said stuff like it's pointless to fight crime because there's going to be a nuclear war later, and there's just so much other things than trying to get muggers. And so Adrian had his mind set on bigger things, and so he knew he had to do something big and drastic. And so what he decided to do was tell the world that aliens attacked. And basically it's like, hey, what is a way to get two sides on the same planet to come together and have the same enemy? Let's get aliens involved. And so what he does,
he builds an alien. Like, so he hired all of those artists that were on the deserted island to build an alien.
Yeah.
Which, this is the thing. Okay, I know this is a story about superheroes. It's a comic book. Whatever. That's the thing that
brings the world together.
Doesn't make any sense to me that he built an alien.
Well,
and so because he explains that like he put the brain of like a psychic into the alien and teleported it. Like, it's bizarre. I don't know. Like, I don't buy it. I don't buy his plan.
It's weird, but it was a simpler time when this was written. But I mean, I get it. It's like, what is some force that we can make everybody get right? And so
no, that does make sense because that's literally what the movie Independence Day is about, right?
Basically,
the whole world coming together to fight against
aliens. And so
that does make sense.
Yeah.
Like, if we knew that aliens existed and that they were going to invade our planet, then we would set aside our differences and decide to survive as a human race rather than fight about stuff.
Right.
So
they created this big old tentacle alien, and they just plop it down in New York City, and it creates a huge explosion. And the alien isn't even like a real thing. It was like a prop, basically, for a bomb. But it just looks...
Well, because that's another thing that doesn't make sense to me, is that how can he actually... Because that scientists are going to study this thing. And
don't look too into it. It's a graphic novel about... There's a naked blue guy walking around, all right?
Right.
But no, I see what you're saying. It does seem a little far-fetched even for a comic.
Yeah.
But...
And so he reveals himself to be the superhero killer.
Yes.
Because he needed to get rid of Dr. Manhattan, so Dr. Manhattan didn't ruin things. And he needed to... So he is the one who orchestrated giving all those people cancer. And he killed the comedian because the comedian was onto his plan. Right. The comedian actually mentioned earlier in the story that he noticed an island full of artists and stuff like that. And so he was sort of... He kind of knew a little bit about what Adrian was planning. That's why he killed him. And then, the rest of it is... I mean, he hired an assassin to attack himself, and then he popped a cyanide capsule into the assassin's mouth whenever they're fighting. So the rest of it is kind of Yeah, I mean, he was the one behind it all, and it was all to set up this plan in which he would plop this giant alien in the middle of New York City and kill millions of people, and but as a means of saving the rest of the human race. And what I like about this place is this is like a trope of, movies and superhero stories, is the villain tells their entire plan to the heroes and giving the heroes enough time to stop the plan. And what I love about this part is Ozymandias is telling them all of this stuff, and this is the majority of the chapter, is him telling them his plan. And as a reader, you're like, well, why would he be saying all this? And at the end, he reveals, I wouldn't tell you this stuff if there was any chance of you stopping me. He said, my plan already happened 30 minutes ago.
Right.
And so then it shows New York City and the kid who's reading the comic and the newsstand vendor, and there's a bunch of other characters, the supporting characters too. Like there was the two women who were getting in a fight, and all of them are. And
wasn't Rorschach's psychiatrist there too?
I
think that was his character. I think so.
Okay.
So you have all these people you've kind of seen before and you're kind of familiar with.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
And then next thing you know, this giant light happens, and then it's just dead bodies all over, and then this one weird alien thing with tentacles.
Well, that's the opening of the next chapter, because it ends on the cliffhanger of everyone being engulfed in this white light, and then you have the quote from the Ozymandias poem, then the next issue opens, and like the cover is like the doomsday clock reaching midnight, and
blood's everywhere.
It's like covered in blood. Yeah. And then you have several full splash pages of just dead people everywhere in New York City.
Yeah, and then the alien tentacles.
Yeah, then the alien
It's a weird thing. Now, it's weird.
Now, I'll point out what I liked about the movie that I remember. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but he, instead of making it a giant tentacled alien thing, he frames Dr. Manhattan for doing this. And to me, I like that idea better, because it's a little bit, it doesn't introduce an unknown concept. It kind of takes something that you already know and works that into the story. So I actually kind of like that element of the movie rather than the comic book.
Yeah, because with aliens, like, all right, there's going to be more of them, and then there's not. And with Dr. Manhattan, it's like, okay, and also that prevents you from wanting to have this happen again where there's another super being, So I think...
Yeah, everyone knows for a fact that Dr. Manhattan exists, and
Yeah, so like you said, the chapter starts, and Dr. Manhattan, they and Laurie, they finally arrive at...
They arrive in New York, and there's they see all the dead people, and Dr. Manhattan's like, well, shit, I guess we were too late.
Yeah, and so then he says, well, I guess my next memory is we're in Antarctica. And so they go to Antarctica and join the rest of them. And really, Ozymandias kind of is still going over his plan and what he plans to do, what he hopes happens, the result is. So Dr. Manhattan and Laurie finally get to Antarctica to see what's going on, and while that's happening, Ozymandias is going into more detail about his alien invasion hoax. And so what caused the blast and killed everybody, he had he found this brain of a powerful psychic, and he had his associates make it bigger and powerful, and basically what he did is they made it appear or drop or do something, and it exploded. And when it did that, these horrifying images of aliens went out to the nearby people that survived the blast. So they would say, oh yes, it was aliens, I saw them. And so it's basically broadcasting an alien attack to the survivors. And so everybody thinks...
Yeah, and so it's like this also... So now all of a sudden there's sidekicks in this comic book world. Which I thought was kind of another... I don't know, it's too much outside new information at the last minute.
He was like, how do I end this? And he's like, oh, this is whatever, it's a comic book, so we'll just make anything happen. And so it was just kind of weird. And then they all decide that, well, but they see on the news that Ozymandias' plan basically works because everybody's coming together. The war's over. Russia says, "Hey, that's terrible what happened. So we'll help you guys in whatever with the war against the aliens, and we'll have peace." And so they all decide to not tell the world what the truth. Well, Rorschach, he's all about uncovering the truth, right? And so he's like, "Oh, I'm getting out of here. I'm gonna get on the Segway, fly back to Night Owl's ship, and tell everybody what really happened." And Dr. Manhattan's like, if you do that, that really ruins everything, and the innocent people that died, their sacrifice will be for nothing. Rorschach doesn't care, so therefore Dr. Manhattan kills him.
Yeah, well, and before that also, so whenever Dr. Manhattan and Laurie show up, Ozymandias, it seems like he kills Dr. Manhattan because, he kind of Ozymandias runs away into this room and then kind of sets up a trap where he lures Dr. Manhattan into this kind of hallway with his cat. And then I guess Ozymandias turns on this atomic thing.
Yeah, it's like a particle something or another.
Well, it's the thing that created Dr. Manhattan in the first place. And so he vaporizes the cat and Dr. Manhattan. And I love it whenever Dr. Manhattan comes back, he's like this giant and reaches his hand through the window. And he's like, "Dude, the first thing I learned was how to put myself back together after being vaporized." That's literally the first thing that he learned after, once he became Dr. Manhattan.
Right.
So, I love the part whenever they look at the news and they see all the news reports of Russia and the U.S. coming together and all that stuff, and Adrian goes, "I did it!" And there's the panel of him with his hands in the air, like, yes. I like that part. But basically, this chapter is all about the team realizing that it's best if they don't say anything.
Yeah.
Because it sucks that all those people died, but it would all be in vain if they exposed the truth.
Right.
So they all kind of reach an agreement, again, except Rorschach, not to say anything, but Rorschach gets killed by Dr. Manhattan then.
But yeah, and so after that happens, it flashed forwards a little bit, and it had, I think, Laurie has a phone call. Laurie's mom has a phone call at the retirement home and says, "Hey, you have some friends who want to see you, Hollis Mason and somebody else." And she's, "Oh, okay, bring them in." And it turns out it's Laurie and Dan, who are basically in witness protection. They changed the...
That's right. They got blonde hair now.
Yeah, and they changed the hairstyles. Dan has a mustache and it looks weird. And they took Hollis Mason's name, and Laurie confronts her mom, and she tells her that she knows that Edward Blake, or the comedian, is her real dad, and she's okay, and she doesn't hate her mom or anything. So it's a pretty powerful scene between the two of them.
Yeah, it's a happily ever after,
sort of,
for the people who survived.
Yeah.
Until
so then it's the newspaper again, and the main editor goes, "What? This was kind of rude." He's like, "Man, where were you? I thought you were killed in the blast."
So he said 3 million New Yorkers died, and you weren't one of them.
Yeah, I was like, "Man, what a piece of crap." Anyway, so they're looking for some other stuff to write about, and then he's go look in the crank pile, and then it shows the lower level employee pull out Rorschach's journal, which obviously tells them that Adrian Ozymandias was pretty much behind everything. Granted, it doesn't talk about the whole alien thing and how it was all fake, but he does talk about that Ozymandias is behind it. So,
yeah.
So in
fact, and what I love about go ahead.
I was gonna say, the whole keeping it a secret thing doesn't happen because Ozymandias is about to be exposed, and I guess nuclear war is gonna happen.
Yeah. And so what I love about this ending is basically at the end of it, so looking at the doomsday clock as a motif in the story, once Ozymandias is successful, the doomsday clock, I guess, reaches zero, right? It goes down. Now the threat is gone. But the final shot is, so this employee, this kind of schlubby employee guy, is munching on this cheeseburger, and a glob of ketchup lands on his shirt, which happens to be a smiley face shirt, and the glob of ketchup creates a hand, like a minute hand on a clock. And we're left with the same image that the graphic novel opened with. Is, the original smiley face was the comedian's button, and the glob of red liquid that created the minute hand on the clock was the comedian's blood. And so now we're kind of left where we started, basically. And the threat of the destruction of Earth is still present.
Yeah.
And so, I like that ending a lot. I think that, again, I don't buy the whole alien invasion thing, but whatever. I mean, I think that it doesn't ruin the ending or anything like that, because I think that the point is gotten across, and that, you can try your best to save the world, you can make whatever sacrifices you want to, but in the end, we're all kind of headed for destruction anyways, right?
I mean, that's basically the moral of the story, is that, they did all these things, and everything was nice and peaceful, but with that journal being read and you assume it's going to be published and the truth will come out. It's
just like Terminator. You're just you're postponing the inevitable, right? Like Judgment Day is going to happen, and whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and it's you want a feel good ending, and it's just kind of like, man, that it was all that was for nothing.
But it leaves it ambiguous enough, though, I think, because again, Rorschach's journal doesn't explain everything,
right?
And so I think that there is some hope. I think it just kind of depends on your outlook. Kind of like, it's almost like we talked about last episode. Are you a pessimist or an optimist? Are you a Rorschach or a Dan in this situation? So, okay, what do you think of Ozymandias' plan? Was that worth it?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of innocent people died, but at the same time, it's a small fraction of the amount of people that are in the world. Yeah. And I don't think that you should kill innocent people, but as twisted as his plan was, ultimately his heart was in the right place. He was doing it for the greater good of the world and for humanity. And so he was okay, everybody else is playing checkers, he's playing chess. Like 3D chess. Right. And that's kind of how I think about it, is, he had a huge plan, and where they say you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs.
Yep.
That's basically what it was he made a huge sacrifice. And
well, because whenever I feel like that's the plot of a lot of movies, is there's a bioterrorist who is concerned with overpopulation of Earth, and that's the Avengers, right? That's Thanos.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you know what? I wouldn't go so far as to eliminate half the population of the galaxy or whatever, but I mean, I don't know. Whenever I watch a movie that has that as the plot, where the villain is trying to basically save the Earth by killing tons of people, and if the good guys stop the bad guy, I'm like, well, okay, they stopped the bad guy, but the Earth's still going to be destroyed, eventually. So technically, nobody won in the scenario.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I am team Ozymandias in this story, 100%.
And kind of playing off that, it's funny. I mean, I've seen so many movies, and it's like, man, the bad guy, he's really got a point.
Yeah.
Granted, like you said, the means, the way to get there, pretty rough and brutal, but
and that's the whole thing with the. I mean, I know we're going to start talking about the Avengers now, but I mean, that's the whole thing with the Avengers, is Thanos was trying to save the galaxy by destroying half the galaxy, but he didn't take into account the emotional cost, the emotional toll that it would take on the surviving half to losing the first half, right? If that makes sense. Right. He didn't consider that, in wiping out half the people in the galaxy, that would not only would just half be alive, but the half that would be alive would be depressed because like half of their friends were erased from existence.
Or all their friends,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
family. So
Yeah. So it's, I mean, because it's like in this world, right? If, like, let's say he did save the world, but now, like, the human race has to be constantly afraid of being invaded by aliens.
Yeah.
So that kind of sucks too, right?
Right. I guess it's better to have the fear of something else than somebody on your planet.
Right.
I mean, that way they can work together. So it is kind of weird and it's twisted and it is definitely manipulating the whole human race. But he said, that's a small price to pay for not destroying ourselves.
That's Watchmen, though. So what do you think overall?
I liked it. It made me want to watch the movie again because I haven't watched it in its entirety since it came out when we were in college.
Mm-hmm.
And with a new appreciation, I would like to watch it again. But I mean, it's good. Like I said before, I just feel like this is it's a fun, quote-unquote superhero story, but it's not really a superhero story. And I feel like it's a Black Mirror comparison to your typical superhero, Superman, Spider-Man, all that stuff. Where it's, I don't know, I liked it. It's a different twist, and it is a breath of fresh air, even if that breath was dark and it's kind of grim and depressing at times.
Well, and at the time it came out, nothing like it had really ever come out. Because, I mean, there had been comics that had violence and, nudity and cursing in it before. Like, there had been, explicit comics like that. But this one, it's like the Black Freighter comic, right? You come to it and you hear that it's a superhero story. You expect adventure and fun. But what you actually get is a morally complex tale.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine reading this at the time and it being groundbreaking because obviously it's so influential, and obviously like we read The Killing Joke, and The Killing Joke definitely seems like a continuation of this, right? Obviously it's the same author.
Right.
It came out the year after Watchmen did, and you can totally tell that it's going for a similar thing, right?
Definitely. And and one thing also about the Watchmen, or just Watchmen, when I was reading it, I mean, it's so relatable to today's world right now because, everybody's scared of nuclear war and on the brink of something. There's...
Well, nowadays it's climate change. I think.
I feel like climate change and just people just... I'm not trying to get it political or anything like that. That's not what the show's about. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like people are just angry and there's just so much negativity out. And that's kind of the scene for Watchmen, too. I mean, everybody's just angry. And, again... There's always going to be a threat of nuclear war. And, I don't know, I just feel like it was relatable.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's because people are afraid of each other. And by people, I mean, again, not to get political, this ain't a political podcast, but people in America are afraid of each other and angry with each other. So I think that this comic is very relevant now. And so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we read in this comic that I didn't bring up because, again, I didn't want to get into a political discussion on the show that just kind of reminded me and made me think of things going on in the U.S. today. So I think that it's a worthwhile and it's a read that makes you think, that makes you consider things at the very least. And so we also, I wanted to bring up before we wrapped up the episode, the HBO series Watchmen. Nick, have you seen the trailer for this yet?
I think I've seen a few. Isn't Hugh Laurie in it?
Maybe. I'm not sure. But the trailer is so the HBO series looks like it's going to be a sequel to Watchmen. It's not a direct adaptation of it. Yeah. I posted a trailer for it on our Facebook page. And so I'm really interested in it, especially since it's being created by the Lost showrunner, Damon Lindelof. And he also made a show that I really like that was on HBO called The Leftovers. So I think that the Watchmen TV series is going to be really interesting, and I think that debuts in October, which is that's one of the reasons why I decided that it would be cool for us to do Watchmen now. So I'll be interested to see that and see what kind of it brings forward. And also, of course, I mentioned this on one of the previous episodes, is that there's a comic book series that's currently being released right now called Doomsday Clock, which is a 12-issue comic book series. I think they're on issue 10 now, but it's a crossover between Superman and Watchmen, pretty much. I don't really know what it's about other than that, but that might be interesting too if you're hankering for more Watchmen. And of course, they also released a Watchmen prequel called Before Watchmen, which I don't know anything about that either. I probably wouldn't read that because I think that I whenever I was reading this, I didn't really feel any need to get additional story about the backstory of the characters and stuff. I think this is pretty satisfying on its own. But yeah, that's Watchmen.
You're right. And I just want to clarify, Hugh Laurie is not in the TV series, but Jeremy Irons is.
Okay.
So that's pretty cool. But yeah, that's all I
Hugh
got.
Hugh Laurie would probably make a good Ozymandias, I think.
Well, that's funny. Jeremy Irons is Ozymandias.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So that'd be pretty cool.
Hey, that's good casting too. I'm okay with that. But all right. Well, that does it for this week's episode of What is Nerd Book Talk Edition. Stay tuned for what we're going to be doing next for Book Talk. We've discussed a couple different things. We'll have official information on that next episode, and we'll probably post some stuff on Facebook as well. So thanks again for listening. Subscribe to our show if you haven't yet on your podcasting app of choice. Leave us a rating or review. That is a huge help. We would really appreciate that. And of course, stay tuned for this coming Friday, in which we're going to be talking about some Jim Henson movies from the 80s, The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, starring David Bowie. Anyways, thanks again for listening. We will see you guys Friday. Goodbye.